The first sign that something has gone wrong never looks like disaster. It looks like an empty shelf where the bottled water used to be. It looks like a parking lot filling up before sunrise with people who have the same idea you have, moving faster than you expected, grabbing things you haven't thought of yet. By the time most people recognize what's happening, the window has already started closing, not gradually, abruptly. The supply chain that feeds American stores is not built for surge demand. It is built for predictability, precision, and just-in-time replenishment. And when that system meets a crisis, any crisis, the math fails in a very specific, very predictable sequence. Understanding that sequence is the difference between being prepared and standing in an empty aisle wondering how everyone else knew before you did. This is not about panic. This is about physics, logistics, and human psychology operating simultaneously under stress. Every item that disappears from store shelves during the first 72 hours of a regional or national emergency disappears for a specific reason. That reason follows from the architecture of modern retail supply, the behavioral economics of fear-driven purchasing, and the fundamental thermodynamics of how consumable resources are distributed across a population. When you understand those mechanisms, the order in which things vanish stops feeling random. It becomes legible. And once it's legible, you can act before the wave hits. The first thing to disappear is bottled water. This happens faster than almost anything else, and it happens because of a phenomenon emergency managers call demand amplification. A single television broadcast, a severe weather warning, a water main contamination advisory, a mandatory evacuation order, triggers simultaneous purchasing across an entire geographic area. Retail stores in the United States typically hold between 2 and 4 days of bottled water inventory under normal turnover conditions. That inventory calculation assumes a steady, distributed demand across hundreds of shopping trips over the course of a week. When that same inventory is hit by hundreds of households all at once in the span of 4 to 6 hours, the shelves are stripped before most restocking trucks have even left the distribution center. The hidden science here is something called the bullwhip effect. It describes how small fluctuations in consumer demand become massively amplified as they travel backward through the supply chain. A retailer who sees empty shelves orders more from the distributor. The distributor, seeing orders spike, orders more from the bottler. The bottler, running at capacity, cannot immediately scale. The result is a gap, an empty shelf that can last between 24 and 96 hours, even when the underlying infrastructure is fully intact. Most people assume stores will restock overnight. That assumption is wrong in an emergency. Truck drivers operate under federal hours of service regulations. Distribution centers do not stockpile massive emergency inventory. The supply chain is a flow, not a reservoir. When the flow is interrupted, even briefly, the downstream consequences are disproportionately large. The practical implication is this: if you were thinking about buying water after a warning has been issued, you are already late. The stores that had water at 7 in the morning will not have it by 10. The stores that received a truck at noon will be empty again by 2. This is not speculation. It is the documented pattern from Hurricane Florence in 2018, the Texas winter storm of 2021, and dozens of smaller regional emergencies where this precise sequence repeated itself with remarkable consistency.
The second item to disappear is not what most people expect. It is not food. It is fuel. Gasoline purchases surge within hours of an emergency declaration, driven by 2 distinct behavioral pressures operating at the same time. The first is the evacuation impulse, people filling their tanks because they may need to leave. The second is the generator impulse, people who own portable generators seeking fuel to run them. These 2 populations are buying the same resource from the same network of stations simultaneously. The average fuel station in the United States holds between 10,000 and 30,000 gallons across its underground storage tanks. Under normal conditions, that inventory turns over in approximately 2 to 4 days. Under emergency surge conditions, documented cases show that a typical suburban fuel station can be pumped dry under 6 hours. The deeper issue is that fuel cannot be rapidly redistributed the way packaged goods sometimes can. Tanker trucks are limited in number, drivers must be available, terminals must be operational, and in the early hours of an emergency, when roads may be compromised or evacuation orders are creating outbound traffic, the logistics of resupply become genuinely difficult. The third disappearing item is prescription medication. This one is underappreciated until someone needs it and cannot get it. Americans carry, on average, approximately 14 days of prescription medications at home if they maintain optimal refill practices. In reality, many households have fewer than 5 days of critical medications on hand at any given time. Pharmacies operate on just-in-time inventory models, just like grocery stores. When a regional emergency triggers large numbers of early refill requests, the pharmacy system reaches its authorization limits. Insurance companies restrict early refills to 30 days before the due date in most states. And the drug distribution network, which operates on daily or twice-daily delivery cycles, cannot immediately compensate. The hidden complication is that emergency overrides exist, but most people do not know how to invoke them. Most state pharmacy boards have emergency dispensing provisions that allow pharmacists to dispense limited emergency supplies, typically 72 hours to 30 days depending on the medication class, without a current prescription during a declared emergency. That provision is real, it is documented in state statutes, and it is almost universally underutilized because patients do not know to ask for it. If you take a critical medication, a cardiac drug, an anticoagulant, insulin, an anticonvulsant, knowing your state's emergency dispensing statute is a genuine survival skill.
The fourth item is manual tools and hardware. This surprises people who have never been through a prolonged infrastructure outage. When power fails for more than 24 hours and electronic communication becomes unreliable, the tools that become critical are simple, mechanical, and human-powered. Hand can openers, manual pumps, basic hand saws, rope, tarps, duct tape, utility knives, and battery-powered flashlights all surge simultaneously. Hardware stores are significantly less well-stocked for surge demand than grocery stores because their normal inventory turnover is slower. The units per shelf calculations are designed for steady project-based purchases, not emergency simultaneous buying. A hardware store that normally sells 40 hand can openers a week will be out of them within 2 hours of a major storm warning because their reorder point, the quantity that triggers a new purchase order, is set for weekly resupply, not hourly depletion. Emergency managers frequently cite this category as one of the most overlooked areas of pre-event preparation, precisely because people associate emergencies with food and water, but underestimate the need for mechanical capability when infrastructure fails. The fifth disappearing item is cash. Not because people are hoarding currency, but because power outages disable electronic payment systems. Automatic teller machines are battery-backed for limited periods, usually between 4 and 12 hours, depending on the model and the age of the unit. When those backups are depleted, the machines go offline. Point-of-sale terminals at stores require both power and internet connectivity to process debit and credit transactions. When either is absent, the merchant has no legal mechanism to authorize the transaction. Stores with full shelves become effectively inaccessible to people who have no cash. The documented evidence for this comes specifically from the aftermath of Hurricane Sandy in 2012, where large portions of New Jersey and New York experienced this precise failure mode. Stores had inventory, people had money in their accounts, but the physical transaction could not be completed. The emergency preparedness recommendation from FEMA and most state emergency management agencies is to maintain between $100 and $500 in small denomination cash at home at all times. Not because banks will fail, but because the payment infrastructure that connects you to your money is fragile in ways most people have never experienced directly.
The sixth item is batteries. Specifically AA, AAA, C, and D cell batteries, along with 9-volt units. This seems trivially obvious until you think through the dependency chain. Flashlights, portable radios, battery-operated fans, Children's medical devices, certain hearing aids, and emergency weather radios all run on standard alkaline batteries. In a major power outage affecting a large area, every household begins drawing down its battery reserves simultaneously. A typical retail store carries between 1 and 3 weeks of battery inventory under normal conditions. During an emergency, that inventory can be completely cleared in under 4 hours. The hidden dimension here involves shelf life and stockpile degradation. Alkaline batteries stored at room temperature retain approximately 80% of their capacity after 5 to 7 years. Many households have batteries that are years past their useful life. They discover this at the moment they most need them. The practical implication is straightforward. Rotating battery stockpiles annually, storing them in cool, dry conditions, and maintaining a quantity sufficient for your specific device dependencies is a basic resilience measure that costs very little and delivers disproportionate value in an outage scenario. The seventh item is baby and infant supplies. Infant formula, diapers, and baby food represent a category that is deeply vulnerable to supply disruption, because infant dietary needs are non-negotiable and non-substitutable in ways that adult dietary needs are not. An adult who cannot find their preferred food can substitute. An infant formula-fed cannot. This category has additional supply chain fragility because the manufacturing of infant formula in the United States is highly concentrated. As of 2022, approximately 90% of American infant formula was produced by only 4 manufacturers at a limited number of facilities. Any disruption, facility contamination, manufacturing recall, regional transportation failure, propagates through the entire supply with very little buffer. During the 2022 Abbott formula recall, the American Academy of Pediatrics documented cases of families driving more than 100 miles to find formula for their infants, and some families reported traveling to multiple states. For families with formula-dependent infants, the first mover advantage in an emergency is not a convenience, it is a medical imperative. Maintaining a 2-week rotating supply of the specific formula your infant requires is one of the most concrete emergency preparedness recommendations with direct, documented clinical importance.
The eighth item that disappears is communication-capable technology, specifically portable chargers and power banks, hand crank or solar-powered radios, and spare phone charging cables. In modern emergencies, the cell phone has become the primary conduit for emergency alerts, evacuation routing, family coordination, and medical communication. When the grid fails, the phone battery becomes the limiting resource. Power banks sell out within the first few hours of a major emergency warning for the same reason bottled water does: simultaneous surge demand against a limited shelf inventory. The deeper technical issue is that cellular infrastructure itself has limited backup power. The FCC reports that most cell towers have between 4 and 8 hours of battery backup. Towers with generator backup, which represents a minority of total towers, can operate for 24 to 72 hours on fuel. But in a widespread emergency, fuel resupply for generator-backed cell towers competes with every other fuel priority. During the 2017 Hurricane Maria landfall in Puerto Rico, cellular infrastructure degraded over a period of days, not hours, as generator fuel was depleted. By day 30, approximately 60% of cell sites remained out of service. The lesson is that redundant communication methods, a hand crank weather radio, a battery-operated AM/FM receiver capable of receiving emergency alert system broadcasts, are not anachronistic. They are a backup layer that functions precisely when the primary layer has failed.
The ninth and final item that disappears in the first 72 hours is, perhaps surprisingly, first aid supplies. Not hospital-grade trauma equipment, but basic wound care consumables. Bandages, antiseptic solution, over-the-counter pain relievers, anti-diarrheal medications, oral rehydration salts, and topical antibiotic ointments. During emergencies, the rate of minor injuries increases substantially. People are working under stress, in low light, with unfamiliar tools, sometimes in damaged environments. They are moving furniture, clearing debris, operating generators.
The emergency room becomes unavailable or overwhelmed for non-life-threatening injuries. The household becomes the first point of care, and the supplies that support that function are, like everything else, purchased simultaneously by a large population at the moment they are most needed. Pharmacies and big box stores typically hold first aid consumables at low inventory levels relative to potential demand because under normal conditions, these items sell slowly and are purchased individually. The system is not calibrated for mass simultaneous demand. The implication is that a household first aid kit maintained in advance, not assembled during the first hour of an emergency, is a fundamental resilience measure with both injury management value and the additional benefits of reducing unnecessary burden on emergency medical services. There is a pattern that runs through all 9 of these categories, and it is worth naming clearly. Every item on this list fails not because it ceases to exist, but because the infrastructure that makes it accessible becomes overwhelmed or inoperable faster than most people expect. The food does not vanish from the earth. The fuel does not evaporate. The medications do not stop working. What fails is the system of distribution, authorization, and transaction that normally mediates between supply and demand. That system is engineered for efficiency under predictable conditions. It is not engineered for resilience under simultaneous surge demand. This is an architectural reality of American retail logistics, not a moral failing or a conspiracy. It is a consequence of the just-in-time supply model that has dominated commercial logistics since the 1980s. A model that minimizes inventory carrying costs and maximizes shelf space efficiency at the direct expense of shock-absorptive capacity. Emergency management researchers refer to this as the resilience-efficiency trade-off. Systems optimized for efficiency are by definition fragile. They have no slack, no buffer, no redundancy. They perform brilliantly under expected conditions and fail rapidly under unexpected ones. The American retail supply chain is extraordinarily efficient under normal demand. It is extraordinarily brittle under emergency demand. And the only meaningful response to that brittleness at the individual household level is to withdraw from dependence on the just-in-time system before the emergency arrives, not during it. The households that navigate emergencies successfully are not the ones with the most money or the most specialized equipment. They're the ones that made a series of unremarkable, inexpensive decisions across the weeks and months before the event. They stored water in rotation. They kept their gas tank above half. They maintained a rolling prescription supply. They knew where their hand tools were. They had cash in the house. They had fresh batteries. They had infant supplies if they needed them. They had a working radio and a charged power bank. They had a first aid kit that had not expired. None of these preparations are dramatic. None of them require significant expense or specialized knowledge. They require only the recognition that the supply system you depend on every day is operating closer to its failure threshold than it appears, and that the margin between adequate preparation and critical vulnerability is narrower than most people realize. The 72-hour window is not a guarantee, it is an average. Some emergencies strip shelves in less than 12 hours. Some provide slightly more time. But the directional truth is consistent across documented events. The stores that appear fully stocked on Monday morning will not be fully stocked on Monday evening when a major emergency warning is issued. The items that disappear first are not random. They follow a predictable sequence driven by demand amplification, supply chain architecture, and the simultaneous behavior of large numbers of people responding to the same stimulus. Understanding that sequence does not require specialized training. It requires only the willingness to look at the system clearly, to see it as the engineered artifact it is, and to recognize that its failure modes are knowable in advance. The preparation that follows from that recognition is not paranoia, it is the rational response to a factual analysis of how modern supply infrastructure behaves under stress. That analysis is available to anyone who looks for it. The question is always whether you look before the warning is issued or after.